The first time my daughter pretended she didn't know me, it wasn't because I had embarrassed her. It was because I reminded her of the life she wanted everyone else to believe had never existed. I still remember standing outside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, wearing the only navy blue suit I own. It had been carefully pressed the night before, and my shoes were polished until they reflected the lights hanging above the entrance. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I was simply a father who had driven 3 hours to celebrate the biggest night of his daughter's life. Emily had graduated at the top of her class from one of the most respected business schools in the country. She had earned every award through years of hard work, and I had never been prouder. As I stepped inside, I spotted her laughing with a group of well-dressed classmates. Their parents wore designer clothes and expensive watches. Their conversations floated through the room: vacation homes, investment portfolios, private clubs. Emily saw me before I reached her. For just a second, I saw the little girl who used to run into my arms after school. Then her smile disappeared. "Dad," she whispered, panic filling her voice. I smiled anyway. There she is, my beautiful graduate. I opened my arms for a hug. She didn't move. Instead, she stepped toward me and lowered her voice. "Please? Not right now." I laughed awkwardly. "What do you mean? My friends are here. I can see that." She looked over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Can you just wait outside? I'll come talk to you later." For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. Then one of her classmates walked over. "Emily, who's this?" She hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than anything she said afterward. "Oh, he's just someone from my hometown." Someone, not my father. Someone. The word echoed louder than the music playing across the ballroom. I felt every conversation around us disappear. Every sound faded. My own daughter had erased me with a single sentence. I forced a smile. "Should get going." She didn't stop me. She didn't even look relieved. She looked afraid. Afraid that the truth about me might somehow ruin the perfect life she had built. As I walked back toward the parking lot, I heard laughter behind me. I didn't know whether it belonged to Emily or someone else. Either way, it followed me all the way to my truck. I sat behind the steering wheel for nearly 20 minutes before turning the key on. Because I was angry, because I couldn't understand where I had lost my little girl. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that their rejection hurt more than any enemy ever could, then you're going to understand exactly how this story ends. And before we go any further, subscribe to Legacy Whisper, because stories like this remind us that love, dignity, and truth always find their way back no matter how long it takes. The drive home felt longer than 3 hours. Every mile brought another memory. Emily at 6 years old, insisting I attend her school play, even though I had worked a double shift. Emily at 10, crying after losing her spelling bee until I bought 2 milkshakes and told her failure wasn't the opposite of success, it was part of it. Emily at 16, promising through tears that one day she'd make every sacrifice worthwhile. "I'll give you the life you deserve." "Dad, I never wanted another life." She was enough. People often assume that because I worked with my hands, I must have failed at something else first. The truth was simpler. I loved building things. For 34 years, I owned a small woodworking shop in a quiet Ohio town. I repaired antique furniture, built custom cabinets, and restored family heirlooms that people thought were beyond saving. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't profitable most years, but it paid the bills. After my wife, Sarah, passed away from cancer when Emily was 12, that little workshop became the only reason I could keep moving. Every chair I repaired, every table I refinished, every cabinet I built, it all helped pay for Emily's education. There were winters when I skipped replacing the heater in my own house because tuition came first. There were birthdays when I bought myself nothing because another textbook had to be ordered. I never considered those sacrifices. That's what parents do, at least. That's what I believed. When Emily received her acceptance letter into one of the nation's top business schools, she cried harder than I did. "We did it," she whispered. No, she did it. I simply walked beside her. College changed many things. At first, she called every evening, then every weekend, eventually, every few weeks. Her voice slowly changed, her words became polished. She started talking about networking instead of friendships, opportunities instead of kindness, connections instead of character. She wasn't becoming a bad person, she was becoming someone who believed success required leaving the past behind. One afternoon during her junior year, she asked me a question that stayed with me. Dad, have you ever wished you were different? I laughed. Different how? You know, wealthier, more successful. I looked around my little workshop. Wood shavings covered the floor. Sunlight poured through dusty windows. The smell of fresh oak filled the room. No, she sounded surprised. Really? I've always wished I could give you more. There was silence. Then she quietly replied, I think that's the problem. I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. A few weeks later, she stopped introducing me to new friends during video calls. When I visited campus, she always seemed busy. There was always another meet, another event, another excuse. I convinced myself she was simply growing up. Every parent has to let go. Eventually, just never imagine letting go would feel so much like being erased. Still, I kept cheering for her from a distance, believing that one day she'd remember where she came from. I had no idea that hidden inside an old wooden chest in the corner of my workshop was a secret I had protected for over 25 years, a secret that, once revealed, would completely change the way Emily, her wealthy friends, and everyone who had judged me would see my life. Forever, the old wooden chest had been sitting in the corner of my workshop for so many years that most people assumed it was empty. It wasn't. I simply never had a reason to open it. The morning after Emily's graduation, I unlocked the shop before sunrise. Routine had always been my way of surviving pain. If my hands stayed busy, my heart usually stayed quiet. Usually, that morning was different. I picked up a damaged rocking chair that belonged to an elderly customer, but after sanding the same armrest for nearly 15 minutes, I realized I hadn't accomplished anything. My mind kept replaying Emily's words. He's just someone from my hometown. I finally put my tools down. Without thinking, I walked toward the old chest. Its brass lock was scratched with age, and a thin layer of dust covered the lid. I brushed it away with my sleeve before slowly opening it. Inside were dozens of carefully organized folders, faded photographs, handwritten letters, and one sealed envelope that had never been opened. I stared at it for a long time. I hope I never have to use you, I whispered. The envelope carried only one sentence: for Emily. When she is finally ready to know the truth. I closed the lid again. Not yet. Some secrets aren't hidden because of shame. They're hidden because love sometimes asks us to carry burdens that someone else shouldn't have to. Around noon, the bell above the workshop door rang. Closest friend, Walter, walked inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. I figured you'd need this. He looked at me for only a second before sighing. So, how bad was it? I forced a smile. It was a graduation. Walter folded his arms. Don't lie to an old Marine. I finally told him everything. I repeated every word Emily had spoken. When I finished, Walter looked angrier than I was. After everything you've done for that girl? She's still my daughter. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. Walter had known me for nearly 30 years. He also knew the secret inside that chest. More importantly, he knew why I had promised never to tell Emily. You can't keep protecting her forever, he said quietly. I made a promise. You made that promise when she was 12. I remember. She's 26 now. I looked toward the chest again. No. Walter didn't argue anymore. He simply placed a business card on my workbench. What is this? Someone came looking for you yesterday. I glanced down. The logo belonged to one of the largest investment firms in New York. I frowned. They must have the wrong person. They asked for you by full name. I've never spoken to anyone from New York. Walter shrugged. They seemed pretty sure. Before I could think about it further, my phone buzzed. Emily. For a split second, my heart lifted. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe yesterday had been a terrible mistake. I answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice sounded nervous. Dad, are you busy? Never too busy for you. She hesitated. I wanted to ask something. Anything. There are going to be some photos from graduation online. That's nice. If anyone asks. She stopped again. My stomach tightened. If anyone asks what? If anyone asks about you, could you just tell people you couldn't make it? I closed my eyes. You want me to pretend I wasn't there? It'll just make things easier, dear. For who? Silence. Finally. For me. I swallowed hard. I understand. No, Dad. I said I understand. We ended the call only seconds later. I stood motionless in the middle of the workshop. Walter had heard enough to understand. He shook his head. She doesn't realize what she's throwing away. I hope one day she does. What if that day comes too late? I didn't answer, because deep down had started asking myself the same question. Over the next several weeks, Emily became strangely distant. Not angry, not cold. Just absent. My texts were answered with one-word replies. Phone calls became voicemail. Birthdays and family dinners were replaced by networking events, business trips, and meetings with people whose names I couldn't remember. Meanwhile, rumors about her success began spreading through town. She had accepted a position with one of the fastest-growing financial companies in Chicago. Her starting salary was more money than I had earned in several years. Neighbors congratulated me everywhere I went. You must be proud. I am. And she'll probably move into one of those luxury high-rises. I hope she's happy. They smiled. None of them noticed that every compliment reminded me how far away my daughter had drifted. One rainy afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived at the workshop. He stepped out of a black SUV wearing an expensive charcoal suit. Everything about him suggested wealth, but the way he looked around my small shop wasn't filled with judgment. It was filled with recognition. Mr. Carter? Yes? My name is Daniel Brooks. He extended his hand. I'm an attorney. I shook it cautiously. I'm afraid you've got the wrong person. I don't believe I do. He reached into his leather briefcase and removed a thick folder. I've spent 3 months trying to locate you. For what? He looked directly into my eyes before answering. Because someone who passed away last winter left very specific instructions that I find you, and no one else. My heartbeat slowed. I think you've mistaken me for another David Carter. I assure you. He gently slid the folder across my workbench. I haven't. I stared at my own name printed across the front. Beneath it was another name. One I hadn't seen in more than 25 years. The moment I read it, every promise I had made, every sacrifice, and every secret hidden inside that old wooden chest suddenly came rushing back. I knew, without opening the file, that my life and eventually Emily's was about to change forever. My hand started shaking before I even opened the folder. Not because I was afraid, because I already knew whose name I was about to see. Charles Whitmore. For 25 years, I had trained myself not to think about him, not to say his name, not to explain why an ordinary furniture maker in Ohio had once spent several years working for one of the wealthiest families in America. Attorney Daniel Brooks watched my expression carefully. So, you knew Mr. Whitmore? I nodded slowly. I knew him better than most people ever did. Daniel sat across from me. I believe there are parts of his life that the public never knew. There are, and according to his final instructions, you're the only living person who can explain them. I let out a long breath. Charles Whitmore wasn't just another billionaire to the world. He was a brilliant investor who built an empire from almost nothing. Magazines praised his business mind. Television called him a financial genius. People admired the fortune. Very few understood the man. Long before I opened my woodworking shop, I had worked on the Whitmore estate restoring antique furniture. It was supposed to be a 6-month contract. It became almost 5 years. Charles loved restoring old things. He often told me, David, people throw away furniture for the same reason they throw away people. They only see damage. They forget that craftsmanship can outlive mistakes. Back then I thought he was talking about wood. Years later, I realized he was talking about himself. His wife had passed away before I ever met him. His only son died in a car accident several years later. After that, the enormous mansion became painfully quiet. Money couldn't fill empty rooms. I was one of the few people who treated him like an ordinary man instead of a billionaire. Sometimes we'd work together late into the night restoring antique tables. Sometimes we'd simply drink coffee and talk. He knew about Sarah. He knew how much I loved her. When she became sick, Charles quietly paid several hospital bills without ever telling me. I only discovered it months later, when I tried to repay him. He smiled. "You already have." "I haven't. You reminded me that kindness still exists." That was Charles. The newspapers admired his business success. I admired his heart. Daniel interrupted my thoughts. "Mr. Whitmore often spoke about you during his final years. I hadn't seen him in decades. He never forgot you." He opened the folder. Inside were several legal documents. One photograph immediately caught my attention. It showed Charles holding a tiny baby, Emily. I felt my throat tighten. Daniel noticed. "You recognize her?" "Of course. She was only a few months old." I carefully picked up the picture. I hadn't realized he had kept it all these years. Daniel continued. "Mr. Whitmore wrote more than 60 personal letters before he passed away. Letters? Most were addressed to charities, former employees, and close friends." He paused, but the longest one, he looked directly at me, "was addressed to you." He handed me a sealed envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. "To my dear friend David." For several moments, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Finally, I unfolded the first page. The very first sentence made my eyes fill with tears. "If you're reading this, then I have finally run out of time. And I'm sorry, I didn't thank you face to face for keeping the greatest promise anyone has ever made to me." Daniel quietly looked away, giving me privacy. I continued reading. Charles wrote about loneliness, about losing his family, about realizing that wealth could buy comfort, but never love. Then I reached the paragraph that changed everything. "I know Emily probably believes she grew up with an ordinary father who struggled every day. Please don't blame her. She never knew the truth because I asked you to protect her childhood." Daniel finally spoke. "Mr. Carter." "Yes." What truth was he referring to? I carefully folded the letter. "The truth that I promised would remain buried until after Charles was gone." Daniel waited. "So," I closed my eyes, "Emily isn't ashamed because she grew up poor. No, she's ashamed because she thinks I never became anything." He frowned. "I don't understand. She believes I spent my entire life barely surviving. And didn't you?" I smiled sadly. "No." I walked toward the old wooden chest. For the first time in 25 years, I unlocked the hidden compartment beneath the bottom drawer. Inside rested another stack of documents, stock certificates, bank records, trust agreements, property deeds. Everything had remained untouched. Daniel stared in complete disbelief. "This." His voice almost disappeared. "This is worth, I know, several $100 million. I nodded. "Once, Charles had tried to leave everything to me after his son's death. I refused. No one person needed that much money. We argued for weeks. Eventually, we reached an agreement. Most of his fortune would go to hospitals, scholarships, veterans, children's charities, and medical research. The rest would be placed inside a private trust. Not for me, for Emily. On one condition: she would never know it existed until she had built a life based on character instead of money." Daniel looked speechless. "So all these years, I continued living exactly as before. You could have been one of the richest men in the country. I already had everything I wanted. What about Emily?" "I wanted her to believe success came from work, not inheritance." Daniel slowly sat back down. "I handled estate cases for 20 years. I imagine you have. I've never met anyone who turned away that kind of wealth." I smiled. "I didn't turn it away." "You didn't?" "I protected it." He stared at me. "For my daughter." At that exact moment, neither of us knew that only 2 days later, Emily would unknowingly walk into a meeting where the name Charles Whitmore would be mentioned. And when she heard the attorney say, We've finally located Mr. David Carter. Every lie she had been telling about her father would begin collapsing right in front of the very people she had been trying so hard to impress. Emily lowered herself into the chair, staring at the envelope as though it weighed 100 pounds. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Emily, if you're reading this, your father has finally decided you're ready to know the truth. I offered David a life of unimaginable wealth many years ago. He accepted only one thing from me, a promise that your future would never be built on inherited money, but on your own character. He believed that if you succeeded, it should be because of your heart and your work, not because of my fortune. The greatest investment I ever made wasn't in a company. It was in your father. He is the most honorable man I have ever known. If you ever feel proud of any fortune connected to my name, remember this. The only reason it exists for you today is because David refused to let money raise his daughter. He chose love instead. By the time Emily reached the final line, tears blurred every word on the page. She looked up at me, unable to speak. I'm so sorry, Dad, she whispered, before breaking down completely. I spent years trying to impress people who never loved me the way you did. I walked over and gently hugged her. I never needed an apology as much as I needed my daughter back. She cried against my shoulder like she had when she was a little girl. A week later, Emily asked me to attend a company event. This time, when her coworkers gathered around, she smiled through proud tears. I'd like you all to meet my father, she said. The man I was foolish enough to hide, and the man I'm proud to call my greatest hero. The room fell silent. Several people shook my hand with genuine respect, not because of Charles Whitmore's fortune, but because they had finally learned the kind of man I truly was. When the trustees completed the estate, I kept only what was necessary. The rest funded scholarships for hardworking students, cancer research in Sarah's memory, veterans programs, and community workshops where young people could learn real skills. Emily chose to help oversee those projects. For the first time in years, we weren't separated by success, we were united by purpose. People often believe the greatest inheritance is money. They're wrong. The greatest inheritance is the character someone leaves behind. Money can change a person's lifestyle of sacrifice, and integrity can change an entire generation. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What matters more, wealth or the parent who sacrificed everything for you? And if you believe parents deserve respect while they're still here, share this story with someone you love. Finally, subscribe to Legacy Whisper, where every story reminds us that true wealth is measured not by what we own, but by the people whose lives we change.